I imagine this has been a gut-wrenching decision for you, heartbreaking even. You've been a lifelong Labour Party member. I mean, whether you and I have disagreed, I've never felt it's come from anything but the heart in terms of your views on anything and everything related to the Labour Party. What made you come to this conclusion that this was no longer the party for you?
Well, it's been quite a long process in a way. I mean, Fiona, my partner, resigned a year ago, and she's actually been in the Labour Party longer than I have. And she resigned, and she wrote a piece I think it was in The Guardian. She said that there were three main reasons. One was Jeremy Corbyn's failure to provide proper leadership on Brexit. Secondly was the failure to tackle anti-Semitism. And the third reason was the failure to produce what she saw as a modern, progressive, forward-looking policy agenda. And I think over the year, we've obviously talked about it pretty much every day, and I've sort of been hoping against hope that things would improve. And it's true that from my perspective, Labour's position on Brexit is better than it was, but I think that Jeremy Corbyn doesn't want to lead on that. He doesn't want to take on the anti-Brexit forces. He doesn't want to take on the forces of populism. And I think on the other two, I think Labour's moved backwards. And, you know, I think the thing that sort of finally fell into place for me was I've just been in Australia doing a mental health speaking tour and campaigning tour, and it was talking to Australian politicians there as well, because Bill Shorten was the leader of the Labour Party, and his poll ratings were way better than Jeremy Corbyn's. Labour's poll ratings were way better than the government, and they went into the election with the whole country thinking that Labour were going to win. But I've had a sense over the last few years that the Australian people had decided some way back they're not putting Bill Shorten in power. And I think they've decided the same about Jeremy Corbyn. And I whether I was working in government or working for Tony Blair, working for Gordon Brown, or as a journalist, I always felt that I'd been able to speak truth to power. And I want to do that to Jeremy Corbyn now, because I think he has to accept responsibility for the state that we're in.
Well, I mean, there's been quite a big sort of battle going on within the Labour Party ever since Jeremy Corbyn became leader in that shock result. Again, he was just put on the ballot paper in a sort of an act of charity. The people were talking about, let's just broaden the debate among the Labour Party. Of course, if you give a bunch of socialists a chance to vote for a true socialist, they vote for the socialist, and he's in. Now, of course, we did see early on, we saw, was 80% of MPs, Labour Party MPs, voting no confidence in him. Ended up having another leadership election. It only shored him up with an even bigger majority of the vote. It does seem, unless he chooses to go, unless he is ousted by his closest advisors, Corbyn is impossible to remove, certainly by the more moderate wings of the party. But there have been two different decisions, haven't there? There have been people who have resigned and left the party, and people like Ian Austin, Shukramuna, and over issues as well as Brexit and anti-Semitism. But then there are people like you who have stayed with the party, who tried to make it change. Do you think now the battle is lost, and whatever happens, whether Corbyn stays or goes, the hearts of the Labour Party that was won by the likes of Tony Blair, I mean Neil Kinnock originally, Gordon Brown, John Smith, Tony Blair, that made the Labour Party an electoral force to be reckoned with and put you in power 3 times in a row. Do you think that battle is now lost to the left wing of the party?
No, I don't. I mean, and look, this has been a very difficult personal decision. There are lots of very close friends of mine who are still in the Labour Party who think I'm doing the right thing, but some think I'm doing the wrong thing, that you have to stay and fight. And that has always been my view. It's my view during the militant years. It was my view when Michael Foot was leader against Margaret Thatcher. And I've been the first election I voted in was for Harold Wilson. That's how far my commitment to Labour goes back. But I think that where I think we've got to stop pretending is that Jeremy Corbyn is the leader who is going to be able to take Labour back into power. And I think this is particularly important right now because Boris Johnson has become Prime Minister. He's boxed himself in. He probably doesn't even know that he's done it, but because of the European Union position, he's boxed himself into a no-deal Brexit. I think that he knows, I'm absolutely convinced that if you went to a referendum of the people, no-deal Brexit against no Brexit, I think no Brexit wins. I think he thinks that. So he can only do it via a general election. So for all the denials that he and Dominic Cummings are making about not wanting an election, he is setting up an election by blaming Europe and Parliament, the civil service and business for not wanting Brexit. And He's then going to go into election because he's convinced that the public will not take Jeremy Corbyn. And I think Labour has to be serious about understanding the reality of that. And, of course, for the people around Corbyn, the kind of, the communists and the Stalinists that are around him, they have never really cared that much about winning in the country. It's all been about the party machinery. And, OK, they've got control of the party machinery, but they're not going to win an election. I think it's time that we stop pretending that they could.
But this is it. I mean, it seems to me there have been a lot of people embrace their number one concern, like, say, for instance, Ian Austin, who's a Labour MP who's left now, sitting as an independent, who's adopted by Jewish parents. He used to be an advisor for Gordon Brown. He left over the anti-Semitism issue. That was it. He felt it was just untenable to stay in a party with someone who wouldn't tackle that issue, believes that Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic. There's been a lot of feeling from a lot of those, who are sort of worried about the anti-Semitism issue, worried about Brexit, like you, on the Remain side, but willing to play along while they thought he could possibly win an election. Is it the fact that his poll ratings have gone down, as I say, below those of Michael Foot, who you just mentioned, that actually, look, he can't win an election? Not that you'd really want him to be Prime Minister if he did win an election. There's a lot of fear there from moderates. But you're deserting him now, some might say, in a rather cynical fashion, deserting the Labour Party now because you think it's not a fighting electoral force. Whereas actually, when he could actually have possibly got into power, you were still willing to stand by him. What would you say to that view, that this is actually quite a cynical decision on your part?
I don't accept that. I think cynical says to me that I'm doing it for motives other than those that I'm stating, and that I'm absolutely clear about the motives for this. It is because I do want the Labour Party to win. And look, let's be absolutely frank. I say this in the letter, and for people who want to plough through the whole 3,500 words, it's on the New European website. It's one of the nice things about being an editor-at-large. You can put all your screeds on there. But the thing is that at the last election, let's just be absolutely frank about this, Labour candidates and Labour MPs were able to say to people, and did say to people, look, vote for me to be your MP, but don't worry, we're not going to win. That has changed. And now I speak to so many Labour people, Labour candidates, Labour MPs, who, when they're asked the honest question, do they actually think Jeremy Corbyn could do the job of being Prime Minister, they say no. Now, that's difficult for them. And I say in the piece, I'm very sympathetic to MPs. I'm not one of those people who thinks they should all sort of rise up against Jeremy Corbyn, because they've tried that. And as you say, it didn't work. I don't believe, I said in the piece, I say that if there's a leadership election tomorrow, the chances are Jeremy Corbyn would win it. But there comes a point, surely, where somebody who is in that position of leadership has to look deep into themselves and say, can I do this job? Can I rise to this challenge? Just look at the last few days since Johnson became Prime Minister. Where the hell have the Labour Party been? What is the strategy? I watched his interview with Sophie Ridge on Sky at the weekend. What was it? Very basic, simple questions that he just can't answer them.
But isn't the reality, if Jeremy Corbyn was a full-on Remainer backing a second referendum, or if he got into power, he would stop Brexit from happening, it's another big passion of yours, you'd stay in, you wouldn't have voted for the Lib Dems, you wouldn't have been thrown out of the party, you'd stay in the party and you'd still be there.
I mean, I do think it's not just about Brexit this now. I think it's about the future of the country. It's about our values. It's about what we stand for as British people. And I think that I really believe now that if the choice facing the country at the next election, which, let's be honest, could be in a few weeks, it certainly could be in a few months, if the choice as to who is going to be in Downing Street, which is one of the most important jobs, not just in Britain, but in the world, if the choice is Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn, I just don't think the country's going to wear that. I think the country is absolutely sickened by the sight of the Tory party, that this leadership election they've had, which has borne so little relation to what actually the country is saying, what the country feels, and then Labour on the other hand. And part of me doesn't want to be saying any of this, but I feel that so many people in the Labour Party, we've kidded ourselves that this might come good. it's not going to come good. We've seen too much now.
What are you going to do now, though, just briefly, because we're a little bit over time? Are you going to, join, I don't know, whatever the Change UK independent group are calling themselves this week? Are you going to follow Chukwuemeka to the Liberal Democrats, going to set up your own party, maybe the SDP, although they're a Brexit supporting party, so maybe not now? Where are you going to find your new political home? Or are you just going to wait it out until Jeremy Corbyn leaves the leadership of the Labour Party?
I mean, the honest answer is I don't know. I've come to this conclusion over quite a long sort of ruminating process, and I've now made that decision. And I think a lot depends on what now happens. I mean, it may be my MP is Keir Starmer. He's got a very, very safe seat, and I like Keir, and I think he's done in the very difficult circumstances created by the clique around Corbyn, he's done a pretty good job. So it may well be, I don't know, that I vote Labour. It may well be that, as before, as in the European elections, I decide to vote tactically in a different way. I just don't know. But what I do know is that I think the country has made its mind up that neither of the people that are now the most likely to be our Prime Minister for the next few years, the country actually doesn't want either of them. And I think that is something we have to be honest about. And I think all sorts of stuff's going to happen in our politics. I'm not following Chukwuemeka to the Lib Dems. No, I'm not part of change. I'm going to take my time and think about it. But I just know that what we have at the moment is utterly unsustainable. Okay. And I know that this Labour Party is not the Labour Party that I've dedicated my life to.